the center of my work is an interest in understanding how physical space, social infrastructure, shapes human behavior, and vice versa. And in fact, I'm really interested in working on the problems that come between these domains, sociology, urban studies, and design. There were a lot of climate puzzles around this event. You know, why did it get so hot? Chicago usually doesn't get that hot for so long. But there were also a lot of sociological puzzles. Why did some neighborhoods have so many deaths? And why did some neighborhoods that looked like they would have a lot of deaths have very few deaths? And the only way to answer those questions was to blend a kind of ecological analysis with a sociological analysis. I came up with the theory about social infrastructure, which for me means the physical places that shape our interactions. And it was by comparing neighborhoods where you have the same demographics, same level of segregation, same level of poverty, same level of elderly people, that you could see how much the physical space, the built environment matters. And so it can't be race that explains the difference between them. It can't be class, it's something else. So I did observational research, I did ethnographic work, and I tried to look closely at how these neighborhoods were different. And what I learned is that the neighborhoods that were really dangerous had a kind of depleted social infrastructure. They felt abandoned. They had empty lots. They had abandoned buildings. They did not have a lot of commercial life. They didn't really have safe, popular public spaces like libraries or community organizations or parks. And the people who lived in those neighborhoods, they tended to protect themselves by staying at home. They made themselves more isolated. And that worked most of the time, but in the heat wave it meant that they baked in their homes. So my argument is that we have failed to build and maintain and program public gathering places, social infrastructure. And we've also failed, I think, collectively to design great shared social infrastructure that we can build not just in the most affluent parts of cities, but everywhere. And so my answer to the question of how we rebuild is that when we talk about an infrastructure investment, we don't just build roads and tunnels and bridges and airports, but we also need to make a massive investment in social infrastructure. That wasn't really a concept, but it just seemed like that was the right way to frame my work. So imagine that you could get above Chicago. You know, you're up in the air, and to understand why the city suffered so much, you open up the skin of the city, and then you look inside the city to understand which organs broke down and caused so much death. And when I did that investigation, I really learned a lot more about how a city works and also how a city breaks down than I ever understood before. Our cities are built for a different climate system than we have right now, and all of our social norms and our routines and our patterns are built on a climate system that used to be. And what I think was happening in Chicago in 1995 is that people's bodies were now living in the Anthropocene. The bodies of people living in Chicago were in the Anthropocene, but the minds of people in Chicago were still in the Holocene. And so, in fact, it wasn't really like the kind of denial we see when people look at science and say, no, I reject it. It was mostly that people could not understand that they had entered a different period of history. And to be honest, I think we still have this problem. A lot of us live as if our minds are still in the Holocene. And that's one reason the story of Chicago is so important. It's one of those early moments when you can see that the world is different, that the planet works differently. And I think now we're at a very particular moment because more and more of us recognize that we are in a true climate emergency, but we're also coming out of a COVID emergency. And we have this crisis around racial justice and the Black Lives Matter movement. And we can see these things crashing together And I think many of us now recognize we have to build a different world. We have to build different kinds of cities. We have to build new structures. We have to build new infrastructures. And the only way we can learn what we have to build is by looking closely at what we've already lived through.